Most people think spotting an expensive watch is easy. Clean dial, polished case, a bracelet that catches the light the right way, and instantly the assumption is the same: it must be expensive. But in reality, that's not always true. Because some watches are designed in a way that creates the illusion of luxury. The finishing, the proportions, the details, they all come together to deliver a presence that feels far above the actual price. And once you start noticing those watches, it becomes difficult to ignore just how much value they really offer. So in this video, we're taking a closer look at 5 watches that look far more expensive than they actually are. Pieces that, on the wrist, can easily be mistaken for something in a completely different price category. Let's start with one that proves a dive watch can feel just as premium as it is capable. The first watch on this list takes a very clean and refined approach, and it's a perfect example of how simplicity can often feel more expensive than complexity. The Hamilton Jazzmaster Viewmatic doesn't rely on bold colors or heavy design elements. Instead, it focuses entirely on balance and proportion. The dial is extremely clean. Slim hour markers, simple hands, and a subtle date window create a layout that feels controlled and elegant. Nothing competes for attention, yet everything feels intentional. The case design reinforces that impression. Smooth curves, polished surfaces, and a balanced profile give the watch a presence that feels unmistakably Swiss. At around 40 millimeters, it sits comfortably on the wrist and adapts easily to both formal and everyday settings. Inside, the automatic movement offers around 80 hours of power reserve, adding real mechanical value to the watch. The finishing across the case and dial feels consistent, without weak points that break the overall impression. It's the kind of watch that doesn't reveal everything at once, but becomes more convincing the longer you look at it. There's a sense of restraint in the design, and that restraint is exactly what gives it a more premium feel. It doesn't try to impress quickly. It builds that impression over time. Even the smallest details feel considered rather than added for decoration. That consistency is what separates it from many watches in this price range, and when you step back and look at it as a whole, the Jazzmaster delivers a level of quiet refinement that makes people assume it costs far more than it actually does. The second watch on this list takes a more detailed and design-focused approach, showing how subtle elements can completely change the perception of a watch. The Seiko Presage sharp-edged SPB 165 doesn't rely on bold colors or flashy features. Instead, it focuses on texture, precision, and structure. The dial is what immediately stands out. Rather than a flat surface, Seiko uses a traditional Japanese Asanoha pattern that creates depth and complexity. As light moves across it, the dial produces shifting reflections and shadows that give it a layered, almost three-dimensional feel. It's not loud, but it's extremely refined. The case design reinforces that impression. Sharp lines, defined edges, and clean transitions between brushed and polished surfaces give the watch a more architectural presence. At around 39 millimeters, the proportions are well balanced. It wears comfortably while still maintaining enough presence to feel substantial. Inside, the 6R35 automatic movement delivers a 70-hour power reserve, adding both reliability and mechanical credibility. The finishing across the case and dial feels consistent, without areas that break the overall quality of the watch. There's a precision in the design that feels deliberate, not decorative. Even small elements like the way light hits the dial texture feel carefully considered. That attention to detail is what elevates the watch beyond its price category. And when you step back and look at it as a whole, the sharp-edged series delivers a level of refinement that feels far more expensive than what you would normally expect at this level. The third watch on this list takes a more tool-focused direction, but without sacrificing that premium feel. The Certina DS Action Diver 38mm doesn't rely on oversized proportions to make an impression. Instead, it focuses on balance, build quality, and clean execution. At 38mm, the case feels compact but solid. It carries a strong presence on the wrist without becoming bulky, making it far more versatile than many modern dive watches. The dial is clean and highly legible, but the finishing is what stands out. Applied indices, bold hands, and a ceramic bezel create a level of contrast and depth that feels sharper than expected at this price. Everything looks precise and well-controlled. Certina's DS construction reinforces the durability of the watch, and with 300 meters of water resistance, it's built for real use, not just for style. Inside, the watch runs on a Swiss automatic movement with an extended power reserve, adding both reliability and mechanical credibility. On the wrist, it feels stable and well-balanced. The proportions are carefully judged, allowing the watch to feel solid without becoming overwhelming. The finishing across the case and dial remains consistent, without weak points that take away from the overall impression. There's a sense of control in the design, where nothing feels exaggerated or unnecessary. Even small details, like the crispness of the indices and the depth of the dial, contribute to a more refined look. And when you step back and look at it as a whole, the DS Action Diver feels far closer to higher-end professional dive watches than its actual price would suggest. The fourth watch on this list brings a more distinctive and character-driven approach, standing out in a way that feels immediately recognizable. The Seiko Prospex Alpinist SPB 121 doesn't rely on size or aggressive design. Instead, it builds its presence through detail and personality. The dial is the first thing that captures attention. The deep green sunburst finish shifts depending on the light, moving from darker tones to a brighter metallic sheen, creating a level of depth that feels far more premium than expected. That effect is enhanced by the gold-toned markers and cathedral-style hands, which add a vintage-inspired touch without making the watch feel outdated. The case sits just under 40 millimeters, giving it a very balanced presence on the wrist. It's compact enough for everyday comfort, but still carries enough weight to feel substantial. One of the defining details is the internal rotating compass bezel, operated by the second crown. It adds both functionality and visual complexity without overwhelming the design. Inside, the watch runs on Seiko's 6R35 automatic movement, offering a 70-hour power reserve along with the reliability the brand is known for. On the wrist, it feels stable and easy to wear across different situations. The finishing across the dial and case feels consistent, with no elements that break the overall impression. And when you step back and look at it as a whole, the Alpenist delivers a combination of character and refinement that makes it feel far more expensive than it actually is. The final watch on this list takes a more classic and refined direction, focusing entirely on elegance and proportion. The Mido Baroncelli heritage doesn't rely on complex design or bold features. Instead, it builds its presence through simplicity done right. The dial is extremely clean, with long applied hour markers and slim Dauphine-style hands that create a balanced and elegant layout. Nothing feels unnecessary, yet nothing feels missing. The case is notably slim, which immediately changes how the watch wears. It slides easily under a cuff and carries the kind of refined wrist presence often associated with much more expensive dress watches. The polished surfaces reflect light in a controlled way, adding just enough visual richness without disturbing the overall simplicity. Inside, the watch runs on a Swiss automatic movement, giving it both mechanical credibility and reliable daily performance. On the wrist, it feels light, composed, and very well balanced. The finishing remains consistent throughout, with no elements that feel out of place or rushed. There's a sense of restraint in the design, and that restraint is exactly what gives it a more premium feel. And this is where the value becomes clear. Because when you look at the watch as a whole, the proportions, the finishing, the movement, it doesn't feel like an accessible dress watch. It feels like something that belongs in a much higher price category. And that's exactly what makes it the perfect way to close out this list.